It's loading. It's
Oh, there it
loading.
is.
There it is.
Welcome back to the season 2 of the Demand Better podcast, where we are your consumer's guide in the health, fitness, and wellness space. We are sponsored by Fit Care Physiotherapy and Wellness, where the emphasis is to focus on your fitness so you can avoid the healthcare space. I'm your host, Corona, coming to you from the concrete jungle of New York City, and joining me, as always, my esteemed co-host, Dr. Bo Babenko, who is in Erie, Colorado. Long time no talk, Bo. What's up?
It's been all of 2 days now.
Yeah, that's
Too
right.
Too long for us. We should be speaking every day. And happy birthday to David Corona. It was his birthday last week. So shout out to everyone. Send him some free drinks or whatever you got.
Okay, well that's enough of that. So let me just start this. Today, we have the incredible honor of speaking to a true luminary. He is an author of the renowned book, You Thrive, How to Succeed in College and in Life. The proud father of Julian Lerner, the Wonder Years fame, and a distinguished professor of the science of happiness, the hottest class at NYU. Not only that, but he also serves on the instructional staff of the esteemed University of Pennsylvania. As a performance coach, he has worked with top-tier musicians, athletes, and executives, helping them to harness the power of a healthy psychological state to enhance their performance both at home and at work. Get ready for an enlightening conversation and inspiring as we delve into the depths of achieving success and happiness with our esteemed guests. So sit back, relax, and get ready to demand better in every aspect of your life. Let's dive into this captivating episode. With great pleasure, I am honored to introduce my friend, Dan Lerner, MAPP. How you doing?
Man, I was doing great, and then you set this bar, this standard, and I was like, who's he talking about? Man, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with the both of you. It really is. I love your work, and Corona, man, I've been a huge fan of you as a friend and a colleague and everything for, going on 20 years now, man. So, thank you for having me on. Dr. Bo, come on, what more needs to be said? Dr. Bo, there it is.
Well, let me say this to you. So this is before we start. I want you to both know how I know you. I both know you from playing football. You both were teammates of mine at different times. Bo played on the football team. You played on the football team. And that's how we all kind of first met. So I wanted to put that out there. Now, with that being said, you know how excited I am about this conversation. How about you give us a brief journey into how you ended up where you are today?
Oof, man. All right. How brief do you want it?
This is your show, buddy. You're going to be here more than once, so do your thing.
All right, let's do part one. So, I grew up in a household with parents who were professional musicians, professional classical musicians. And, so I got to watch these two people who not only were top of their game. My dad was in the Pittsburgh Symphony as a flute player. My mother was an opera singer, sang at the Metropolitan Opera, Paris Opera, all these wonderful places. But people who were really happy with what they were doing. I mean, I would watch them play and they were genuinely fulfilled, whether they were on the stage or they were at home playing with one another, or the three of us were playing. I grew up as a cellist. And, that was what I saw as the idea of success, right? Is that like, you're happy and you're on stages around the world, or you're really successful at what it is you did. So in my little brain, I was like, well, you're happy when you're successful, right? I mean, that's how it goes. But when I took my first job out of college, and I was working as an agent for classical musicians, mostly opera singers, conductors, directors. Technically, I wasn't an agent. I was an assistant. I was an assistant to an assistant, but at a very big company called Columbia Artist Management. And then I went to ICM, International Creative Management, and I saw something that was kind of new to me. I saw a lot of folks who were like my parents, right? They were successful in the music business. Their name was in lights. They were making decent money, the whole thing. And they seemed to be happy, or let's just say fulfilled, a better term, fulfilled people. But I also saw something I hadn't seen before. And that was folks who were just as successful, if not more successful, far more successful in certain cases. And they were miserable. And clearly there's lots of gray area in between. But that really surprised me. And I saw it for so long. For 10 years, this divide between success and happiness, and success and unhappiness, that I finally decided I needed to understand it. The other thing, by the way, that I saw when I was there, which really shaped my path forward, was that you would see two people who seemingly had equal potential, right? Two people coming out of a major young artist program like the Metropolitan Opera, just a few blocks away from where I am right now. And everyone was like, these are the two hottest singers coming out. And one would do that, and the other one would kind of do that. And I was like, what's going on? Like, it has to be psychological. Something has to be going on. So after about 10 years in the business, I left and I got really interested in that question of when do success and happiness or well-being or fulfillment, when do they coexist? And I wanted to understand the psychological process of realizing human potential, but also I wanted to understand why some people were happy when they were successful and others weren't, and if it made a difference in their performance. Does it matter if you're fulfilled when you get on the stage, on the field, on the podcast as a host, when you get to your classroom if you're teaching, when you get to your law firm, when you get to your restaurant and you're working, right? Does that make a difference? So I went back to school, and first I dove into performance psychology. A lot of people think about it like sports psychology. And that was great. It really helped me understand a lot about that process of how we take our talents and do the most with them as performers. But it wasn't enough. And there were a couple of books on the syllabus when I was involved in performance psych that really caught my attention. One was Flow by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, and the other one was Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. And I thought, wait a second. So there's research about how well-being impacts our ability to perform. So I went off to Penn and studied with Dr. Seligman, and I studied positive psychology, the science of happiness, the science of positive relationships, the science of meaning, the science of purpose, the science of passion, the science of willpower. Otherwise, the way we talk about it is the science of what makes life worth living. And that's how I landed where I am, which is teaching at NYU, a positive psych course called The Science of Happiness, and throwing some performance psych in there, speaking about both topics on a regular basis to various organizations and groups, writing about it consistently, and coaching through it as well. So that is my not so brief but abbreviated story of how I got to be where I am, and I love what I do. I'm really lucky.
Listen, man, it's amazing. I've known you for so long, and I've learned so much about just doing research on you. So, a couple things here. Yeah. Number one, we both had the opportunity to dive into You Thrive. Now, I will say this to you. That can be used by me. I mean, it's not just for college students, but that book kind of brings me into something that I want to touch on right away. And Bo, I'm going ahead of what we were planning. Your dislike for self-help books.
Wow, you got in there fast, man.
But no, because You Thrive is a book, right, to help people, right? So Absolutely. You write this great book, and you have a dislike for self-help books.
So, wow, thanks for bringing that up so quickly. Boom, there it is. All right, everybody, just in case you hadn't realized from season 1 and the early part of season 2 of Demand Better, Corona cuts to the quick. So let me reframe a little bit, and then let me explain a little bit. So it's not that I have a dislike so much for self-help books as I do a real wariness about the self-help industry, if that's helpful, including the books, right? So there's this umbrella called self-help, and almost anyone seemingly can dive into be under that umbrella, right? And look, the basic term self-help, you want to help yourself, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And there are absolutely materials out there that can help us help ourselves. But I think it's really, really hard for people to know which ones are the ones that will work for them, right? You can go and buy, for a long time, and I don't know if it's still the case, when people went into self-help sections, they kind of did so like with a hat pulled down low, the collar pulled up high. There was like a little bit of like, I don't want anyone to see me. And I think it's blown up in a way where people are far more comfortable talking about it, going into that section, going to a workshop, being online, talking to others about it. That's fantastic. The challenge is what works. And if one self-help book worked, you would only have one self-help book on the shelf, right? But you don't. You have like 40 on the shelf, right? Because some of them are going to work, some of them are not going to work, but most of them, and I think this is where I take issue, most of them will say, and I'm going to flub but paraphrase one of the most popular self-help books of all time, which is The 7 Habits, Stephen Covey. And in his opening, he says, this book will work for all people. Now, the challenge I have with that, and that's not to say that book doesn't work for some people or many people, and if it does, fantastic. But the challenge I have with that and so many other books, whether it's drink this coffee and it's going to work for you, read this book and it's going to work for you, do this program and 30 days later, it's going to work for everyone who does, is that for the people who it doesn't work for, it can be really detrimental. As I say, what's wrong with me? There's clearly something wrong with me. If I read this book, it's going to work for all people. And I do quote that from that book and many others. It doesn't say it directly, it basically indicates that. There's got to be something wrong with me. But the challenge is if you're writing or speaking, there's no way to hit all people. It's just not how human beings are built. So the challenge I have with the self-help industry is the generalized statement by so many folks who are there to say, this will work for you. Now, the one guarantee I give to my class, NYU, that I give to the audiences that I speak with, the one guarantee that I give them right up front is I guarantee not everything I say today will work for everyone here in this room, right? So let's say I talk about mindfulness and meditation. Lots of great research that underpins it. By the way, a lot of self-help books either have no research that they're based on, or a lot of the research is cherry-picked. A study from 1973 of 8 people, that doesn't work. That doesn't work for me. Like, I need a more current study. I need a lot more participants for me to really find it to be a foundational piece. But something like mindfulness meditation, great science around it in terms of diminishing stress, in terms of improving performance, in terms of helping with anxiety, lots of different things. But if you're told you should meditate and it's just not the thing for you, people are feeling like they're failures. Now, it's going to work great for some people, but not everybody. And meanwhile, something like a gratitude journal or something like using character strengths in a new way every day, there is great science underpins that also. But you know what? It's not going to work for everybody. And it might work for you today, but not next year. Just like mindfulness meditation might not be your thing right now, but 5 years down the line, it might be it. So saying this is going to work for everyone right now in 7 days, in 14 days, in 30 days, I think can be really detrimental to folks' psyches and their abilities to understand how they create change. I think that we need to really understand what the research says. And for people, instead of being told what to do, right, at the end of each chapter, do this, give them questions to think about how they would answer them, so it's much more personalized in the help that they're trying to provide for themselves.
What I will say to you is that there's so many darn parallels between what you're talking about, what I do and Bo does every single day. This whole concept of CrossFit's for everybody, or this exercise program is for everybody. And you go into that, and when you go into that and you fail, that person says fitness isn't good for me. Or you go to a trainer and it doesn't work out because that trainer's strategy wasn't what it was supposed to be. This training doesn't work for me. And I'm going to turn it off to Bo because I've been just yapping. But I'll say this to you: this one size fits all. Susie does it. She looks great. Well, you're not Susie. I say this all the time. You're not her. You don't have her genes, and you don't have her diet. And you don't do what she does. But we're looking in this world. We're all looking for the one thing, without realizing that we're all unique within ourselves, and that different things will actually move us to make those changes and to be comfortable enough to make the change. Change and growth are hard. And I see in everything you're doing is stuff that I have done and Bo has done on a regular basis. And when you deal with people don't even understand value. They go to the self-help, like, this book's $4.99. This is what's going to get me there. I don't want to talk to Dr. Lerner or Dan Lerner because, I don't know, he's too much money. Whatever it might be, we're looking for the easy way out, but we're not willing to put the work in. And I see that a lot. And the parallels are outrageous.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. The one size fits all, it just doesn't, and look, as I said, there are going to be folks like Susie who benefit really, really, really tremendously from the trainer they're working with. But if you're not working with a personal physical trainer who assesses your needs, right? Like, asks me the questions. What do you want? What are your strengths? What are some things that you're looking forward to? And then assesses, in their professional opinion, my body type, my abilities. You're just getting another program. And it's not going to work. It's most likely not going to work like it does for Susie. And that can be really demoralizing for someone. As you said, fitness doesn't work for me. It's not fitness. It's just one program. Let's try something else. Right. And that's so key.
It's the journey.
The only thing that we know works for every human on earth is David Corona, personal trainer, Upper East Side. Go see him. But let's take a few
Took
steps
the words
back,
right out of my mouth, though.
Let's take it back a few steps because, as you alluded to, Corona I think he even like sped through the name of your book. Didn't even introduce it as your book that you published.
I'm sorry, Dan.
You could make implications and things like that, but we did want to cover that. So the letter U, as in university, thrive. I assume that was the intention of the book as it looks on the cover. And yes, we did get a chance to go deep into it, and came out a few years ago. And as Corona alluded to as well, as much as it was written for college students and helping folks through that journey. So if anyone out there has anyone they know starting the college process, if they're in the college process. But yeah, I think you talk about stuff that applies to all aspects of life that people are still struggling with. I know, pretty sure one of the people listening right now, 31-year-old client I have that I think needs to learn these lessons over and over again because she makes silly decisions in life, and that's okay. It happens.
Don't we all?
We all do. Yeah. So the book You Thrive, I wanted to shout out the fact that, and you say it on one of your interviews I watched leading up to this, was, you would call it the science of well-being for your course, but nobody would show up. You'd get 3 people like me and Corona, and then some other weirdo, some other nerd. But the science of happiness, there's a lot there. But I did want to just shout out the fact that you talk about breath work. I do tons of that. I'm even trying to make Breathe Thursday, #Breathe Thursday, a thing. But it's not quite there. It's not quite there.
It's better than Breathe Monday. I'll give you that
much. And you tie in a lot of the concepts of physical fitness, which obviously we're talking about here, and we're trying to be the consumer's guide for health, wellness, fitness, all these things. Obviously, that mindset piece is huge. And my 5 pillars of health that I talk about with my clients, we have 3 that are physical, moving, how we move better, move more, move all that good stuff, quality, quantity. We have the recovery piece, we have the nutrition piece, and then there's the 2 mindset pieces of internal, how we think inside, and then self-help books, so we can call it that. And then the other one being connection, which, you touch on a lot. You always make the joke about sleeping with people in college, and you're always talking about the roommates, not the other way around.
There you go.
That's exactly what it
Hey, it's college.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So bringing it back to the breathwork piece, the physical fitness piece, and the fact that it's called happiness, I wanted to ask you, with the way the book's been received, feedback you've gotten, if you've modified anything, because that book came out, I think, 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so operationalizing happiness, as the course alludes to, and you do talk about PERMA model with Martin Seligman, the growth versus fixed mindset, positive psychology, optimism. We want to get into all these different things, but I'm just going to bring it all back to, how do you operationalize? And for anyone not familiar with that term, we're just trying to take a complex concept like happiness or love or something like that doesn't have a very simple answer, and seeing how we can break that down. So I'll throw it back to you, Dan, of how do you operationalize happiness, and are you tired of doing that?
You're tired. It's a funny thing. So this course I teach at NYU, this is our 10th year teaching it. I say our because one of my best friends in the world, Dr. Alan Schlechter, adolescent psychiatrist, an amazing guy. We co-wrote the book together, and we've been teaching the course together for 10 years. And, we try to make it very clear, both in the book and in the classroom, that it's not about happyology. It's not about just getting happy, right? There's a lot more to well-being than just being happy. Happy is an essential component. Let's just call it positive emotions are an essential component. And I'll just go on tangent for a second to say, when I say that, it's because there are lots of ways to experience what people think about as happiness, but what I'm going to call positive emotions. You can jump for joy. And when we think about joy, we think about a physical energy, right? Literally jumping for joy. But, under the umbrella of positive emotions also come things like calm, tranquility. That's a positive emotion. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're jumping for joy. It means that we find a sense of peace, right? But you can also say that pride in what you've just accomplished is a positive emotion. You can say love is a positive emotion. You can say happiness, which might be a little almost like below joy, above calm. There's a sense of energy. So when we look at the research, these are all studied individually. Interest is a positive emotion, which we might not automatically think of, but hope is a positive emotion, and it's different from all the others that I've mentioned. And what we know through the research is that they all operate differently. So if I am in a classroom, or I'm in the workplace, or I'm in the gym, right, and I'm working out, joy is going to be very different than hope. It's going to have a different outcome. Hope is going to have a different outcome than interest. I might be interested in my workout, but hopeful is going to provide a different level of motivation. It's going to provide a different level of distraction, wandering thought, so on and so forth. And I use these terms because, again, we've seen it in large-scale studies. So being able to help not only students, but as both of you pointed out, anyone who comes to the classroom or anyone who reads the book, understand what a positive emotion is can be immediately helpful. Oh, I'm never joyful. But you know what? I usually feel a pretty good sense of calm and tranquility. What do I feel at my best? When I'm proud of what I've gotten done. That is just as valuable in many ways as something like joy or something like happiness. So it's important people understand that so they know, as we talked about before, it's not going to be the same for everybody, right? And they can still value those things. And we do that with lots of different, with all the different topics we touch on. I think it's an important thing to understand when it comes to well-being instead of just happiness, as we hopefully make really clear in the classroom in the book, is that we can't just think about the positive. It'd be unrealistic. So, Bo, you mentioned optimism before. Optimism is an incredibly powerful thing, right? And lots of people want to be optimistic, right? And we hear lots of talk in things like social media and a lot of self-help books. Just think positively, everything's going to be great. But we do know, and we explain, that being overly optimistic can have some really negative outcomes, right? Overly optimistic means I don't need to get that shot. I never get sick, right? So I don't get the shot, right? Overly optimistic could be I don't need to study because I'm going to get a great grade. And then you get your paper back and you realize maybe I should have studied some more. So understanding the array of experiences and what's right is key. But pessimism is also really important, right? It gives us some caution. Yeah, you know what? I'm afraid that with something going around, I should probably get that shot, right? Because I'm probably going to get it, right? Now, that makes us cautious. It might make us study more or prepare more in a way. It might make us train harder. If you're an athlete and you're like, I'm never going to make this team, that could be drive for I got to work harder, as opposed to, I'm going to make this team. I'm the greatest athlete out here, right? Very, very different outcomes. So we're looking at a variety of ways that we can see positive, and also let's say the opportunities for well-being, but also the challenges to well-being, which is why in the book and in the course we talk about, and this is, I referred to Dr. Schlechter before, Alan, as I call him, when I'm not calling him other things that I can't say, on this podcast. Love this man. He's the funniest, brightest, most loving guy. We also have lectures on stress and chapters on anxiety and on challenges to our mental health. Because guess what? That's reality. I mean, look, what is it right now? At least as of 2019, 90% of college students were dealing with overwhelming stress every year. About 63% of them said they felt sad on campus every year. Levels of anxiety and stress have risen, and depending on the study you look at, between 3- and 5-fold over the past decade. Not just on campus, but for everybody. And if we don't prepare ourselves to know that's stress, that's anxiety, ooh, that looks like maybe mild depression, we're going to be living in this false world of I'll just think it's going to be great, and it's going to be great. But sometimes we need some help. And sometimes we need to think about it differently. And sometimes, let's say always, understanding the landscape, both on the positive and on the challenges, is going to be key to finding well-being in our lives.
Yeah, one of my favorite songs ever, Mose Allison, I don't worry about a thing because I know nothing's going to be all right. That's
That's awesome.
I got a 2-part question here for you. Okay.
Yeah.
And part 1 has to do with my age, right? And back when I was younger, when I was a kid coming up, I was
David Corona, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, when I met him, he was like 30-something, and now he's like 19. Like 90. David Corona just continues to get young. He's like Benjamin Button.
So with that being said, my generation, when I came in, I was trying to make people, because I went to an all-white school, so I was trying to always fit in, whatever it took me to get in, to get by, to be happy. Our generation, at least my generation, was the suck it up generation. You work hard, you'll be happy at some point, but you work hard, you'll get married, and then you're going to be happy. It wasn't about being happy today. It was about being happy in the future and getting that job. Part two of that question is the new generation, is the loneliness factor that we're discussing, and the self-doubt. Is that social media oriented? Because listen, I'd rather talk to you by phone or in person than on a screen, for sure. And I'm not sure if the relationships are totally different. Being with someone, there's emotion there. Come up, give you a hug, like, hey, what's up, man? You know, there's a positive emotion within that you don't get from a screen. So
that's right.
The generations are very different, and it's very interesting that where we are right now and what you're discussing.
Right. No, both great and both big questions. So can we start with number two, since it's it's the most recent, and then we'll back to number one, if that's okay. So
I'm old. I might forget my thought. Go ahead.
Oh, note that down. Would you? I forget it too. So what are my hands doing right now?
Probably resting on the table.
They could be, but the fact is that you don't know that I'm actually gesticulating, right? I mean, if I were to if I were to stand up and do it, you'd see my hands.
This is a family show, Dan. This is a family show.
I didn't bring that. That's on you. I said nothing. But the fact is, if I back up and you see my hands, there is an energy to them, right? So to your point, Corona, like if I'm with you and I'm bouncing on my toes, right, and I'm using my hands, right, as any good Italian or Jew would know, not to
New Yorker. New Yorker.
There you go, New Yorker. Yeah, you got a problem with that? So when you see body language counts, right? In fact, and I might flub this number, but when it comes to communication, words, the actual words that we use, the words that we use only count for about 7% of total communication, right? The tone that we have, the way that we emphasize certain words, right? So we're texting each other, we're not getting any of that. Right now, we have this, I like to think, like wonderful energy here. Not getting any of that. Only 7%. I have to go back and double check that, but it's Jane. I'm totally blanking on her name. University of Michigan. Anyway, so when we look at the way that we communicate, literally look, it's changed. So being able to feel closeness, right? As you said, like bring it in. Like, it's great to see you, man. It's been a long time. Like, A, there's the hug, and B, there's also like the excitement of seeing somebody that you can barely get when it's just words on text. When it's something like Zoom or something like this, like I said, if I drop my hands, it's a very different experience right now than it is right now, right? So being able to see somebody matters. And, I won't even go into the whole question of mirror neurons, the ability to imitate other people's body language to make them feel comfortable, right? That's important. And we're losing a lot of that. So when it comes to relationships, we're losing quite a bit of that. And that's really challenging. I think, to bring in the social media piece, a lot of the way that we communicate these days, the young people out there, but even us, not so young people, is over social media. And what do we see on social media? And I don't want to oversimplify this, but what are you posting to social media? You're posting the times that are awesome for you. Look at me, I'm on vacation here in Cancun, Cabo, whatever. Look at me, I'm with my family and we're super happy. Look at me, I just got a new car. Look at me, I'm having a great time with my friends, whatever it might be. But that's one moment in time. And we see so much of that I think the research shows that we've come to expect that. Not once a day or twice a day, but all the time. But that guy's always happy. Susie is, we'll use Susie as a figure here because you brought her up before. Susie's always happy. Susie's always somewhere cool. Susie's always doing something really amazing. And so we get to expect that level. When it comes to relationships, always with their friends, traveling with their friends, dining with their friends, having a wonderful time with their friends. I'll tell you a funny story. I took my son to Europe last summer for the first time. I was super excited. I lived in France for almost a year. I have a lot of friends over in Europe, and I was dying for him to see. He was 14 at the time. Looking forward to watching his face as he experienced new things. And we were about to get on the plane. We're flying to Paris, and we hear, excuse me, behind us. And we turn around, and there's a young fella, early 20s, being wheeled through the crowd in a wheelchair. And we're like, of course, we get out of the way. And, he goes right on. He goes on first, and that's great. And then we board. And I fly a lot, so I got upgraded. I'm not a fancy guy, but we got upgraded. And so we're about to get in our seats. And the same guy who was in the wheelchair comes sprinting down the aisle and jumps into one of the seats and puts it all the way back, so you can lay back in the seats. And he hands the phone. He goes, "Hey, take a picture of me." And I'm like, "Okay." And I take a picture of him. And he goes, "Thanks." And he runs right back to the back of the plane. And my son Julian goes, "What just happened?" And I'm like, "He's going to put that on Instagram, guarantee it." So why you're wondering why everyone has like great stuff or great clothes? They return the clothes. Those tags are still on, right? They take pictures in places, and you think that's reality, but it's not reality. But it sets a standard for us it's almost like airbrushing the photo. It's impossible to meet. That's an issue. So yeah, social media is a challenge, and I would argue that it may be, and I'm not a fan of absolutes, so I'm just going to say it may be the most influential factor on why our levels of happiness are down, stress and anxiety are up, because we think that seeing people on Zoom or an Instagram is almost like communicating with them. We think that seeing them that's what their life is, but it's not, and we're losing out. So standards going higher, and we're getting ever more challenged by those standards. Right? Yeah. Now I can go back to question one if you'd like, but I'll let you all guide this.
You have a question, Bo?
I was going to say one of the things I liked, and again, in terms of operationalizing happiness or wherever we are with that, but is picked it up from Ben Bergeron, another podcast person. I did look up the 7% statistic, by the way, before I forget. Use this Google thing here. And it's attributed to Albert Mahrabian, a researcher of body language. He said 55% communication nonverbal, 38% vocal, 7% words only. So that goes back 90% figure. It's a 55-38-7 formula. Not very sexy. Anyway, but what
I found that incredibly sexy, but I'm a total nerd when it comes to this stuff. Seriously, I'm like getting a little flushed right now.
You're blending into the mahogany. The
rich mahogany and my many leather-bound books.
If anybody is listening only on you got to check out the YouTube version, because Dan's got a great setup going there. But the thing I was going to bring up was an interesting measure with these conversations about connection recently is how many people could you hug for more than 5 seconds in your life and not feel awkward and not feel like what is happening here? And that measure is a really interesting way to that I've heard recently of, again, saying, oh, I could think of at least 10 people right off the top of my head. And if you're not lucky enough to have 10, then are the 5 that are in there enough and things like that. So I don't know. Have you heard anything like that? Does that tie into any of your teachings?
Wait, say one more time. So how many people
could you hug for more than 5 seconds without it being awkward?
That's interesting. Well, let's put some parameters here. I assume that you have to know everyone you hug, right? You can't just walk up to someone and just be like, "I'm hugging you right now," right? Because awkward for who? For them or for me? Because I'm a hugger, man. I'm a hugger. But 5 seconds is a good. No, that's a funny one. We've not talked about that. We have talked about the idea that when you hug someone for 6 seconds, that your oxytocin levels jump up, right? That being said, and I'd almost go back to a couple of questions ago and a couple of answers ago. We cited that data back in 2013 when we started teaching this course. 2012, we started teaching this course. We don't anymore. And that's one of the things I love about science. Dan Gilbert, one of my sort of heroes, he wrote a wonderful book called Stumbling on Happiness. He's been a professor at Harvard psychology for many years. He says at the beginning of the Psych 101 course, 50% of everything I teach you this semester is going to be wrong. I just don't know which 50%.
That's said in every medical school as well.
There you go. And so glad that it is, right? Because things change.
Yeah.
And we find out that the data we've been given, and it looks on the face of it and is accepted as strong supported data. But we find out different things. World was flat until about 500 years ago, right? And all of a sudden, it's not anymore, right? We find out different things. And so I think that's really important. So the 5-second rule, the 5-second question, it brings me to a lot of different sort of tentacles. One being, why are you hugging them? Another one being, the idea that we can only have so many friends that are close to us before we have to ask the question of, are we spreading ourselves too thin? So, I think that goes back to the idea of, what do you do? Who are you? So if we were to say to the audience, the more people you can hug for 5 seconds, I'm not saying this is what you said, but if we were to say the more people you feel comfortable hugging for 5 seconds, the better. What if you're an introverted person? What if you're someone who shies away from physical contact, but you feel a closeness with someone in a different way by having an intimate conversation with them? And that is how you express yourself, right? Being able to share something with them. Like, I could hug lots of people. Doesn't mean I'm going to share some of my more private thoughts with them. And so for some people, that's going to be more or less important. The idea that we might not have contact with this larger community. I see a lot of people, right? I have 1,000 students a year, right? And I do not initiate hugs with any of them as much as I'd love to, because some of them are awesome, right? But I've had a number of students who are like, can I give you a hug? And I'm like, I'm in the classroom, there are 500 people around. Yeah, man, give me a hug. It's cool, right? So I'm comfortable with that. Not everyone's comfortable with that. But I also have to be aware of my surroundings. So there's so many factors that come into play whenever I think about a data point like that I take it with a big grain of salt, knowing that could work for a lot of people, but given all the other circumstances, I wouldn't want to put it out there and be like, find lots of people to hug 5 seconds, because might not be right for them, might not fit the circumstances, so on and so forth.
Okay, so I want to go back to my question, because I'm very curious for my generation of people. So the us suck it up and you'll be happy later.
Yeah.
How do you talk to this generation here and with those people? Because I see a lot of heavy divorce now in my generation of people. So I'm just wondering, with the happiness thing and the way we were brought up, how that works in terms of the happiness quotient, as we would say.
Sure. So, I guess I look at it a couple different ways. And it's funny you bring that up, because for some reason it's stuck in my mind, and I probably read it during high school. But the New York Times Magazine had an article, high school is 160 years ago, right? It had an article on the golden parachute and Goldman Sachs. And I remember reading this article, but what I remember really standing out was, they have like bolded quotes that they want people to really walk away with. And it was a guy who said, I never got a chance to see my kids grow up because he was working so hard. I never got a chance to see my kids grow up, but now I get to see my grandchildren grow up, right? Because he had worked at Goldman for whatever it was, 20, 25 years, 30 years, and then exited with never had to work a day in his life. And I remember reading that being like, oh my Lord, I would never, ever define that as success for myself, right? When I have kids, which now I do, but even back then as a teenager, I want to spend some time with them. That's going to be really important. Now, again, not saying it's for everyone, but I remember that sticking with me and being like, could never do that. And yet you're right. The idea that, we have to work, and we'll get to a place where we're happy later was, and still is to a great extent, a very influential way of thinking about success and happiness. So I guess the way that I come at it is, again, through the research. Because what we will argue in the classroom and in the book, and I think what science shows, and not 100%, by the way, I tell my students, if you ever use the word always, never, everyone, or nobody, I'll fail you, right? It just doesn't work in this class unless talking about Corona and his ability to, just make people, into 10 times what they thought they could be. But in in our classroom, we depend on the research. So if we look at a piece of research and we see that priming someone with positive emotion, right, as researchers did at a major university, that is to say, they had them think of the happiest memory they could for 45 seconds. Really sit with it, envision it. Where were you? Who were you with? What were you doing? What did it feel like? And then they would put them through tests of creativity, for example, right? Like, how many different uses can you think of for this AirPod case, right? They would, on average, find about 70% more uses for that AirPod case. If they prime them with positive emotion the same way, happiest memory you can, 45 seconds. And then they gave them tests of memory, right? They taught them words in a foreign language. They would retain, on average, not all, some more, some less, about 30 to 35% more words in that foreign language than their non-primed peers. So when I'm able to look at those kind of statistics about creativity, about standardized testing, and how much better people tend to do, not always, but they tend to do when they're primed positive emotions. Doctors, how they are just as accurate as their non-prime peers, but they are faster in their diagnosis, up to 21% faster. That's how I explain it in the classroom. But I think, and that works for some people. But when you add to that real life stories where you look at someone and you can compare them, and you can be realistic to say, look, you don't have to be happy. Let's look at two people who are very clearly successful. And let's look at sports for a second. Bob Knight. And if you don't know who Bob Knight is Bob Knight was the head coach of University of Indiana men's basketball. He won a national championship as head coach of University of Indiana men's basketball, which is the pinnacle of that field. He won a national championship, right? He is a successful head coach of a men's basketball team, right? And then he was fired when he was caught on camera, literally choking one of his own players during practice, right? The guy wrote a book called The Power of Negative Thinking. So there are ways to be successful without necessarily being positive or being happy. And by the way, for all you out there, providing you don't have sensitive ears, if you go and Google, not right now, by the way, I always tell my students that, because you will Google it. They will Google it, right? No, I'm like, not now. But if you go and Google, write this down for later, or text yourself or something, Bob Knight halftime speech is the most abusive, violent speech you're likely ever to hear, right? Because they're losing at halftime, and what he says to his players is like crazy. But if you look at someone like Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, recently head coach at Duke until he retired, and has 5 national championships as head coach. He has 3 Olympic gold medals, if I remember correctly, as head coach of that team. He also gives back to his community. He spends time with his family. He has a not-for-profit, right? He has said, I do not want my players stressed, because that is not how they play their best. He had all his players one year have a basketball signed by all the people they were grateful to that helped get them to where they are, right? And they would carry that around. Not carry a ball around someone tried to knock out of their hand, but rather carry around something so they felt gratitude. And he's been very successful. So I'm not going to say that you can't be successful without being happy. But I think if we look at folks like that and other comparisons, Steve Jobs versus Richard Branson, Whitney Houston versus Maya Angelou, or versus, not versus, but, in contrast with Oprah Winfrey, right? We have people who are very successful and unhappy, and people who are very successful and happy. There's a choice, and you don't have to choose success before happiness. Often what we're finding in the research and in the stories we're able to share is that that being able to find well-being, or let's say, step back, to have positive emotions before they go out and they use that on the pathway as part of their pathway to success, they are often more likely to realize that success, right? So highlighting those things matters.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I sent that Bobby Knight speech in the comments, so if anyone wanted to use that, and we'll put it in the show notes later. So yeah, that's great stuff, Dan. I want to see if we can wrap it up a little bit, be respectful of your time and the listeners' time, so we don't go too long. Unless Corona, I'm sure, well, like he said, alluded to, and I know we talked about offline, the fact that we got days of material here. Yeah. But this is the Demand Better podcast. We're trying to demand better from happiness, from self-help books, all that kind of stuff. Do you have a takeaway of something somebody could do listening of, can I assess my happiness? Is just, we could just easily say, go read your book. Other than reading your book or working with David Corona, how else can we be happy?
That's pretty much it, though.
Always. And
not
never.
necessarily in that order either. So, I guess there's so many different ways to look at this. And I really appreciate the fact that, Bo, you mentioned before that you have kind of a matrix for well-being yourself, right? And there are lots of different matrices out there, and many of them have been studied. And I'm not going to say, one is better. There's no best, put it that way. I think what matters is what works for you. That being said, you did mention PERMA before, and that's the matrix of well-being that we tend to talk about in class. I tend to use, and in part for a number of reasons, in part because of something you brought up. How can I measure it? PERMA is an acronym. It does come from Dr. Martin Seligman, a kind of mentor of mine, teacher of mine, and sort of known as the father of modern positive psychology. He's the former president of the American Psychological Association. The guy has real cred, not just I stepped in and decided happiness is everything. Like, he's been at this studying depression and stress and anxiety and well-being in all its forms for many years. The acronym PERMA stands for 5 things. The P is for positive emotion. And as I explained before, it could be lots of different ways to experience positive emotion. The E stands for engagement. A lot of you know it as flow, kind of being in the zone when you lose track of time and you're like, whoa, where'd the time go? It's basically where challenge meets skill. So you're not too challenged, stressed out, but you're not bored, meeting right in the right place. The R stands for relationships, or positive relationships, which is relationships that you can really enjoy wonderful times with, but also relationships that are very trusting, people that you feel comfortable sharing the harder things with. The M is for meaning. Meaning, as we define it, is a connection to something larger than ourselves. It could be how we give back to our community. You might ask the question of, how does the work that I do help make the world a better place, or help other people? Maybe the person sitting next to me, maybe the beneficiaries of the money that I'm raising for this not-for-profit, maybe the clients that I work with in the gym. How does it help them live better lives? And finally, the A is for accomplishment or achievement. And to be real clear, accomplishment or achievement doesn't necessarily have to be the big things. Got into college, got a new car, got the promotion, because those are wonderful things, but they're not going to happen every day. It could also be the small A. What did I set out to do today? I set out to do a good podcast. I set out to answer these emails, and I set out to have dinner with my family. If I can look back on that day and say, I've checked these 3 things off, I'm doing okay. So when we look at PERMA, I like to think of them like buckets. Each one is a bucket. And it would be unfair of us to think that they should all be overflowing. That's not realistic. But we need to have at least a drop in each bucket to be thriving in life. We have to have some positive emotions. I mean, look, you can have accomplishments like crazy. Your bucket's totally overflowing. If you don't have anyone to share it with, like the relationships bucket, and that's bone dry, really hard to be thriving in life. So, if we're not doing well, and I don't want to say that always, because there are mental health concerns that a lot of people are dealing with, which also need to be dealt with in addition to something like PERMA, which allows us to go beyond baseline and 0, from negative into positive. But if we're struggling a little bit, you might want to look at that checklist. How am I doing on those five areas? Now, there's a PERMA scale. You can go to Martin Seligman's website. I think it's authentichappiness.something. Where there's an array of psychometric assessments ranging from optimism, pessimism, to satisfaction with life, to PERMA. And you can get a sense of where you sit with that. And having some sense of baseline. A, am I leaving this bucket totally dry? And B, let me focus on that a little bit the next few weeks. So I get a student come in like, I'm doing great, straight A's, got into graduate school or got the job or whatever, but I'm kind of struggling. We talk about it, walk me through your schedule. Well, get up at 7, go right to the library. I'm there until my first class at 9, drop in and get like something to eat, go back to the library. I'm there till class again. I go out, I might work out, I go back to the library, hit the sack, up, repeat, right? I'm like, I didn't hear anything about other people there. Seen your friends? And it's like revelatory. They're like, oh my gosh, friends. I haven't even thought about that. Like, yeah, you might want to like invest a little time there. It doesn't have to be all day, every day. Why don't you work out with a friend? Why don't you have that meal with a friend? Why don't you take a walk with a friend or a cup of coffee with a friend? And they come back a few weeks later often and they're like, that made a difference because there's one factor we're not thinking about. So I like this matrix because it gives us these 5 buckets and it allows us to get a sense of where we might be, self-assess or go off and take an assessment and give us some understanding and targets of where we might want to aim and where we might want to get to. And by the way, let me say this. We talked before about how 50% of everything I'm going to teach you is wrong. A lot of people note, and I think very rightfully so, that there's nothing physical in there. I mean, I'm happy when I work out. I feel a sense of accomplishment when I work out. I'm super engaged when I work out. But what about the body? So there's an argument for adding something like V, or vitality. How are you sleeping? How are you moving? How are you feeding your body? That for a lot of us, I know for me, and I know for you guys, is really important, right? Because I know that it's really hard for me to thrive or be fulfilled or have well-being in life if I'm overtired too often. That's a really important factor. And there are times when I'll come home and I'll look at my family and they'll be like, you should go to the gym. And I'm like, why? Right? And then I come back and I'm like, oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm such an asshole. If I don't work out like at least 5 days a week, I'm just not feeling me. So that's something that comes into play too. But that's it. It's that we're complex human beings. Not so complex, that we can't allow ourselves to look at it in such a complex way that we can't get a handle on. But if we get some basic factors down, some basic buckets down, it might allow us to get a sense of where we are, where we're doing well, which is important. People don't do that often enough. Where am I doing well? But also where we can shore things up a little bit too.
If one of your buckets, one of your buckets today was to come in and do a good podcast, I think we've accomplished that. I think.
Oh yeah.
That was my only bucket. So
one of my buckets is, as a new dad with a 10-month-old, is dad jokes. Ooh, and I was very sad having watched a lot of your talks leading up to this that you did not use your dad joke about what rhymes with Goldman Sachs. So.
Oh man, that's right. You're out. I'm so sorry. I will use that one next time.
Do you want to say it now? Do you want to do the joke now?
Well, it's tough to do it when you're not in the moment. It's kind of like a boutique joke. Let me do it differently. In a recent bit of research, we found that, as I mentioned before, I didn't mention this, but among college students in 2019, about 45% of those college students dealt with work debilitating depression each and every year on campus, which is scary, right? If you think maybe they're not happy because they're not at the right college, they want to go somewhere better. There's another college, another university, very well known. We won't mention it. So just say it's near Boston. How's that? And it rhymes with Schmarvard. And that university, depression is far higher. How's that? We'll do that, Rick.
Well, usually you kind of mixed in the depression and the suicide, but that's okay. It was comical.
Let's just say that often when I refer to Goldman Sachs, I say we won't mention it, but rhymes with old man snacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to give full credit to Reb Rebel. He's one of my favorite people in the world, and just got his PhD in psych, and brilliant guy for that one, which I steal liberally. But I'd like to give credit where it's due.
There you go.
Like I want to give, just like I have solid reference and citation section. Anything
I'll share my favorite dad joke now. Is how do you know it's a dad joke? It's a parent.
Ooh.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, that's good.
That's terrible. That's good.
Man.
Anyway, I'm gonna stop on that note for myself. Corona, let's go to you.
No, listen, I want to keep this about an hour because Dan's a very, very busy man.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be here, man.
But yeah, I'm happy. I'm really happy to have you. So I'm going to ask you to come back. You know that. So because there's so much more that
I'm in.
But with that,
I won't keep you on time. I won't keep you waiting or nervous. Like, I'm in.
Okay, so that's great. So
this time you'll put it on your calendar.
Yeah.
Yes. This time this was supposed to happen same time last week. Guess who didn't realize it because he didn't write it down?
It was Corona's fault. It was Corona.
Let me put it differently. Who has 2 thumbs and doesn't write stuff down? This guy.
This guy right here, too. That's age, man. So I'm going to try to put a bow on this here. Like that? You like that, didn't you, Bo?
I always.
Oh, that was nice.
What can you give the listener as they walk away from this pod? Something that they can carry with them. Because I heard some really, really good things from you, Thrive, writing things down before bed, things that you're grateful for. You had some really, really good strategies in that book. My question is, what can we give the listener to walk away with so that they, as they're listening to this, what can they take away and they can start practicing in their day that might be very helpful to them?
So let me try to abbreviate it. Let's look at PERMA again. And let me give you one brief exercise for each. There are lots of exercises for each one, but let me give you exercises that will not take you more than 5 minutes each day, right? You can walk away with. Positive emotions, keeping a gratitude journal. Write 3 things down at the end of each day that you're grateful for and why. 1 sentence each. I'm grateful for Corona and Bo because I had a great conversation with them today, and it was just so much fun to be able to interact with friends and share the information. Period. The end. Right. I'm grateful for my dogs because when I got home today, I was able to go for a walk after a stressful day. Made me feel better before I walked back in the house. Whatever it is, 3 things and why. Right. It might be tough for you, but over the course of finding about 30 days, what we're learning is it retrains our brain, rewires our brain to see the world differently. There are not 3 things you're grateful for. There are 30 or there are 300. You're just not noticing them. When someone helps someone else, if they fall on the ground or pick something up for them, we just forget about that. Write that down, right? That is a really nice way to raise levels of positive emotion. For positive relationships, write 3 quick texts every morning to someone, right? Thanking them for something or noticing something. Great job with your workout yesterday. Really appreciate your help on the presentation. You did a terrific job studying last night, right? You were a great teammate yesterday. Thanks for helping me, right? 3 things every morning. We find over the course of about a month, again, trust and bonding rises considerably, right? For engagement, use a character strength. And I would go back to the Seligman site. Character strengths are strengths not of skills, but their love, their gratitude, their honesty, their bravery, their humor, right? And we look at those 24 strengths, and when we're assessed to find our top, what we call our signature strengths, when we use one in a new way every day, we're far more likely not only to raise our levels of well-being, but when we insert it into something that we're doing, studies, work, a project, we're far more likely to be engaged, in that project, and also to realize the goals we set. So figure out your character strengths and use them in a goal or in a project that you're working on, in the workplace, with your family. When it comes to meaning, ask yourself one of the 2 questions I suggested. How does the work that I do help make the world a better place? Or how does the work that I do help other people? And don't just ask yourself. Sit around the dinner table with your family and discuss it. Bring it back to your workplace. Ask that question to your team, right? We see meaning go through the roof in research that we saw come out of University of Pennsylvania. So being able to discuss those things can be helpful. And finally, with accomplishment, like I said, give yourself 3 things in the morning and keep them easy. I want to get my laundry done. I want to clean up my room. I want to work for a half an hour on that presentation, not for 13 hours, right? And check them off. And you're far more likely to realize you've actually gotten something done that day. So there's plenty more. As I said earlier in the podcast, I guarantee you one thing. Not all of these things will work for you. But if they don't, there are others you can use. These are 5 examples of things you can try. Some will work, some won't. Some might work in 3 weeks or 3 years. Some will never work for you. But it's about getting out there and making an effort. And making an effort in a way that we know that again, I'm biased, but that the research shows can create change if you work at it and if it's aligned to the things that work well for you. By doing so, you can raise your levels of well-being in lots of different areas.
It's amazing.
I want to leave 2 little breadcrumbs for part 2 because we're going to do this. One is, I don't know, and you don't have to answer now, but just going to leave it for my own sake when we come back is the courage to be disliked, and then the sequel, the courage to be happy. So for anyone out there, you can look into that. Adlerian psychology. We can geek out on all that. You got my nerd juices going. And then the other one is that you just kind of brought up about the meaning piece. There is Carl Jung's shadow work, where how you present in the world and things like that, of really fascinating stuff there. So I would love to geek out on all that. I'm going to leave those breadcrumbs, and then Corona, you're going to finish us off.
Listen, man, Dan, first of all, thank you very much. I'm going to thank you again.
My pleasure, bro. My pleasure.
Thank you, the listeners, for joining us on this incredible journey today.
We are not worthy.
Thank you all.
We are truly grateful for your presence and support, and a special thank you to you, Professor Lerner, for gracing us with your wisdom and the inspiring story. If you enjoyed today's episode and found value in our conversation, we kindly ask for your support. Help us spread the word about the Demand Better podcast by writing a review, liking, sharing, or subscribing to our show. Your engagement means the world to us and helps us reach more individuals who are seeking to demand better in their lives. Remember, together, we can make a difference and strive for a better tomorrow. Stay tuned for more thought-provoking discussions and inspiring guests in the upcoming episode. Thank you once again, and until next time, keep demanding better.
You did so good, but I wanted, before we sign off, where are the best places that folks can go find out about you, Professor Lerner?
Yes. You can go to daniellerner.com. Lots of information there about the book and what I do and what I discuss. The folks I work with for speaking, Lavin, the Lavin Agency, Lavin. They have a great page. I think their page is better than my website. You look up Lavin, Lavin, Google Lavin and Lerner, Lerner. There are lots of videos on there and other topics that I discuss. And frankly, check out the book too, or my Insta, Dan Lerner Insta. Right, that's it. You can check that out as well. But I'm always happy to respond to folks, to interact with people. So if you want to jump on, hit me with a DM on Dan Lerner Insta. By all means, do. I will definitely get back to you. Look forward to engaging with you and helping in any way that I can.
On that note, now we can sign. I just needed the last word. No, we're going to sign off, guys. Thank you for everything. We'll talk to you guys.